Hello again, welcome back. Let's continue talking about class 2 and we're going to move on to map, filter, and reduce. So what's map, filter, and reduce? Well, these are methods of the array. So like for each, right? Actually, for each should really be on this list, right? But map, filter, and reduce do specific operations that you might do with an array. Like oftentimes you're looping over an array, and while you're looping over an array, you're doing one of these three things. You're mapping, you're filtering, or you're reducing, right? You might do something else, but most of the time you're doing one of these. So if you understand these, and the more you understand them, the more often you'll use these, right? You'll see what they do. So let's this graphic here with these emojis is kind of fun and it makes a lot of sense. So if we start with corn and cows and chickens, we might map them. So map is a transformation. So you'll end up with an array. It outputs an array, right? And what it'll do is it'll take all the items from the input array and transform each item. So for example, we take the corn and we transform it, we cook with the cook method, and we turn it into popcorn, right? So what happens here is each item from the input array gets passed through the mapping function, right? And the mapping function returns a value that's added to the output array. So if we pass the cow in, it's kind of grim, right? Gets turned into a hamburger. If we pass the chicken in, I guess we should have an egg here, but I guess the chicken's free get in, and then we get an egg, like a fried egg, okay? So what does filter do? Well, filter takes an array, an input array, and then it looks at each of the items here with a filter function, and the filter function decides, should we keep that item or should we not keep that item? So filter returns true, or the filter function, right, is vegetarian, returns true if that item is vegetarian, let's say, and false if it's not. So popcorn passes into is vegetarian, and it says, yeah, true. Hamburgers pass into is vegetarian, and that returns a false, so we don't include the hamburger. And then the egg passes into is vegetarian, and we return a true, okay? So with a filter, we'll be returning an array, and it'll be a subset of the items from the original array, okay? And let's talk about reduce. So reduce takes an array and then reduces it to a single value. So if we use the eat function, it's a little gross, but if we ate all these things here, it might produce a poop. I don't know, right? So that's what happens here, right? So let's talk about a couple details. So when you're using map and filter, they do not edit the original array. They don't mutate this array. Instead, they make a new array. So this is a brand new array with the different items in it, right? Okay, or with a subset of these items. Okay, this is a brand new array with brand new items because they've been transformed. Okay. Reduce, on the other hand, just reduces to a single value. And this value can be a number, a string, an object. It could even be another array potentially. So you could actually, use reduce to do a filter function, right? Or to act like filter or map potentially. Okay, so let's look at each example. So use map to transform each element in an array. So we pass each item here through the function here, the callback function, and that function returns the transformed item. So whatever happens, the cooking process happens in here, and then it takes a value in and returns a cooked value, okay? Filter. So filter returns a subset, maybe I should bold that, subset of the source array. So it could include all the items. Like if everything here was vegetarian, if that was like a veggie burger, then it would be included, right? And again, it returns a brand new array at the output. Okay, let's talk about reduce. So reduce takes in an array of values, and it passes them through this function, and then it returns a single value. So you might use reduce to add up all the values to get a total. You might use reduce to to create a string from a bunch of separate values. You might combine them all together to create a single string, things like that. You could also create objects, and reduce can actually return just about anything. Okay. Okay, let's talk about map for a moment here and get more into detail with map. Okay, so again, map, we use it to transform elements. Okay, so we're going to transform each of these items into something new. So let's take a look. So here's what it looks like in code. Let's imagine I start with an array of numbers, and it takes a parameter here that is a callback, right? And this callback is going to get passed each one of these numbers. And what it's going to do is the callback is going to return the transformed value. So we pass a value in, and then it does something to that value and returns it. Okay, let's look at another one. So yeah, here we are. So if we wrote the callback function out, it might take an item in that would be one of these values, and then it would do something to the value here and return it. Okay. And oh yeah, so actually map does a little bit more. So the parameters for the callback, like this is the callback here. Let's make that bold, right? The parameters in the callback, actually it takes in the item, that's the value here. It takes in the index of the item, that would be index 1, index 2, right? And then it gets the array itself. So if you need to do your transformation, you might need to know where that item was in the array, and you might need to know the original array for some reason, okay? So it actually gets all of these. You don't have to use them. The item is really the most useful item because it's the thing from the array, right? So let's look at another example. Let's imagine we wanted to convert each of these values to a fixed number of decimal places. So what we could do is we could say array.map, and then say, here's our mapping function. It's going to take an item in, and then it's going to return the item to fixed 2. So to fixed converts the item to a string, a number to a string, and then adds a fixed number of decimal places, in our case 2. So the output should be an array that has these values in it. If we started with the input array that looked like this, if we started with that first array, new array here should look like this. Okay? Let's take another look, right? So let's imagine, this is like a little more involved, but let's imagine we started with a bunch of date strings. So I have a bunch of strings that are dates like 9/26, 1965, 2/6, 1971, 10/27, 2005, right? And what we want to do is take those date strings and transform them into date objects. So we could take a date string into our callback as a parameter and return a new date object, and we'll just pass that string into the date object, right? So now this new date should be an array of date objects. If we took the date objects and transform them, we could turn them into date strings that look like this. So we could say date.toString on each one, and then this would return the string, and we'd have an array that looked like Sunday, September 22nd, or 26th, Saturday, February 6th, Thursday, October 27th, right? And then if you just needed the years, you could take the dates and say map, and then for each date you could say get full year, and that would return the year as a number. So you'd get 1965, 1971, 2005. So that's a pretty compact, system right there, right? So, using map, like I get a lot of mileage out of map. Learn how to use map. Let's actually learn to use map by making your own, okay? So the goal here is to use the REPL here and write your own mapping function. So what you're going to do is you're going to write, I have some examples here that use map. So if you run the code here, you can see that it maps to these dollars, right? And, oh, I have the solution. I'm actually going to delete that. There we go. Okay. So you try it on your own. You can peek back at that, but I'll go over the answer later. But your goal is to write a function called mapper. And mapper is going to take in an array and a callback, And the idea is that if you called mapper with the numbers array and then you included the callback function here, it should return these values, right? It should turn an array with, you know, it'll convert each of the values into a dollar sum, right? So it should say $3, $5.50, $2, $2.50, right? Okay, so that's your goal. So you're going to write your own mapping function. So the goal here is you need to, loop over each item, right? And then call the callback with the item, okay? But you'll also need to return an array. So call the callback with the item and then push the returned value into a new array. Actually, you know what we should have done is before we looped over the item, we should have made a new array. Make a new array. So you're not going to make a new array each time here. You're just going to make one, and then you're going to push each item into that new array, right? And then at the end, you're going to return the new array. Okay, so that kind of outlines everything for you there, right? So you're going to make a new array, loop over each item, call the callback for each item, push it into the array. This actually, let's tab that once, because this should kind of happen inside this loop. And then at the end of the loop, after it's over with, when the loop is done, you're going to return it, or return the array, that is. Okay, so give that a try, and then we'll go over the solution. Okay, so how did you do on the solution there? Okay, let's take a look here. So here's the solution that I came up with. I've got my mapper function. It takes in an array and a callback function. I'll make a brand new array here. I got the count, or the length, of the original array. And then I'm going to loop over each item in the array. So I've got I is my index. I'm going to count. I'm going to keep looping while I is less than the count. Add 1 to I for each iteration. And then what I'll do is I'll take the new array and push in the item returned from the callback. So if I call the function here with the item, and I passed in the I there too for fun, but really this is the most important thing here. When this returns a value, that returned value will go into the array, okay? And then after the end of the loop, I'll return the new array, right? So let's let's do this. Let's say, let's do const. So maybe I'll copy this one here. That way it gets the color, right? Okay, so imagine that doubled is an array of our original numbers, but they've all been doubled, right? So mapper is going to return the new array. So this new array would go into here, right? So we're going to call mapper. It's going to make a new array. It's going to return it, okay? So mapper takes in numbers, and then the callback function is here, and the callback function takes in a number. That's this parameter here. We're ignoring the second parameter, but there's our first parameter there. And then it returns the number times 2, right? So this is the implied return from the arrow function, okay? Okay, so hopefully that kind of clears up or gives you an idea of how you might use callbacks.